Hello everyone, and this is live from Frankfurt, Germany, Rational Science, the only site that does real, genuine science, physics specifically. Let me tell you what we want to do today. I'm going to do a little recap of the month, first of all, and then I'm going to follow that by a little bit of an introduction there. It's going to extend a little bit. I'm going to try to shorten it. Then I'm going to answer some of the questions people or comments that people asked and made this past week or since last time. And then we're going to open up the floor for questions, okay, with my son here, Hans, my youngest son, okay.
Hey guys.
My brightest of sons.
Hey guys.
Okay, let's start with a recap, okay? Let's get going here. This is what we did since the beginning of the, yeah, I'm going to blot you out. Since January, we discussed very briefly whether philosophy is part of science, okay? And the answer is yes, but we have to redefine philosophy in such a way that it is limited to explanations, okay? So that's the issue there. Does math have anything to do with science? The answer is a flat no. Mathematics can only describe. An equation is only a description of what? Of motion. Even when you describe a square, what you're really doing is describing an itinerary around the square. Okay, so math is only a description of motion. And science, we don't describe motion or anything. What we do is explain a mechanism, a consummated event. Many Nobels have been awarded for quantum. Okay, discussed that in quite a bit of detail. But can the quantum mechanics folk, explain any invisible, intangible phenomenon rationally? A particle being in two places at once, I think that says it all. Okay, if you can explain that, well, my hat's off to you. No Nobels awarded for relativity until recently, for 70 years, for over 70 years, no Nobels were ever granted for general relativity.
You mean since the birth of general relativity?
Yeah, no. Since the birth of the Nobels, general relativity, remember, special relativity starts really with Einstein, not even with Einstein, starts even before that. It goes to the end of the 19th century. 1889, you have Fitzgerald, who's criticizing Michelson-Morley experiment, which said there is no ether. And Fitzgerald was George Fitzgerald, he was a pro-ether fellow, and he couldn't accept that, so he started with a length contraction. That was followed by more formal paper by Lorentz. And Lorentz, he comes in 1892, and from there on you have other people who enter the discussion, among them Einstein, 1905, with his fourth paper on the movement of bodies. Can't remember the whole title, but something like that. And others that published papers around the same time. By the time you get to 1915, that's when you get general relativity, which encompasses special relativity. So since then, or even before that, since 1900, 1900, no Nobels awarded for over 70 years. Makes you stop and think. All the Nobels were awarded for inventions, as we covered that, and also for quantum mechanics, particles. So the question there, are black holes, dark matter, dark energy, space-time, Big Bang, alternative realities, holographic universe, are any of those a part of science?
Well, what's the point of...
And the answer there is no, because those are simply irrational explanations for mathematical descriptions. So the mathematical description we have no problem with. You know, they do their equation, they describe motion, that's fine. It's the physical interpretation of their equations, which is what you see there. That's the problem there, okay? And finally, is technology a branch of science or related in any way to science? And I'm going to discuss that a little bit today. So
No, I was just wondering, what's the point of saying that there was a large span of time where general relativity didn't get any Nobels? What's the point of that?
because there was nothing to give a Nobel for. Not really, not totally. You have to really put it in the right context, and this is the context, okay? The context is that you have in 1915, Schwarzschild, he comes, a German guy who died in the war, he died a few months later. He comes up with his paper on black holes. He says, calculation, because the notion already existed since the days of John Mitchell in the 18th century, that, a star could collapse to zero size, or could not withhold it could not fight against its gravity, okay, if it was big enough. So they had this notion in their head. When Einstein comes with his equation, Schwarzschild uses the field equation to calculate that, yes, indeed, a star will collapse to what is known today as a black hole. And that's the first starting point. Then you've got Chandrasekhar, Indian guy, and he worked for Arthur Eddington, who was his boss, in England. And he told him, hey, a star actually does collapse to zero size. Here's the equation. And both Eddington and Einstein said, you're crazy. No such thing. And I think that's why they never gave that was in the late 1920s. So they never gave a Nobel Prize, at least until that point. Then for the next 20 years, well, you had the war in between, you have other stuff going on. You don't get to the Nobels for relativity until, and this is just a very loose interpretation, until 1967, when you have Hans Bethe, and he talks about how a star produces energy, light, okay, heat. And you say, well, what's that got to do with relativity? Well, he was trying to show that how you create hydrogen atoms. See, we could all explain with his equations, we could explain how helium and anything above helium comes into being. What they could not explain, how hydrogen came into being. Who made that? God? And so the issue was, how does that enter the picture? He said, well, if we go all the way to the Big Bang, and at the time they had the notion already of the Big Bang since 1929, since they found that the universe was expanding, or so they thought. They took the film back. They said, we end up with a Big Bang, the little ball that started it all. And so, when you have this situation, they had the idea of Big Bang. They said, there's the only place where you can find the energy to, the pressures to create hydrogen, protons and electrons, and later on atoms. Okay, so that's how it enters the picture, through the Big Bang. But he was really trying to show, that it's how a sun works, how a star works. Okay. Anyways, let me get on with technology. We're going to have lots of questions probably today, and I want you to hold up questions until later. I was watching a documentary the other day, and it's about people who shun technology. We talked about whether technology is part of science or not, and whether it enters the picture of science at all. Okay, and the answer is no, because you got to define the terms technology and the term science. Once you define those terms, you got to be straight and keep what's in each group. Okay. But here you have a group of people who have technology at their disposal, and they don't use it all, okay? And they're known as the Mennonites, okay? And we have Amish and Mennonites. There's relatively little difference between them. The difference, you could say, is that Mennonites are more willing to embrace technology than are the Amish. But they also have limitations, okay? I don't see so much of a dividing line, but you'll see in a minute that, yeah, there is a little bit of a line between them, okay? Okay, so here's the parts from that documentary. Some of you probably watched it at one time or another. And the first thing I want to point out here's a teacher in one of their classrooms. And the first thing you see is a plastic bottle and a plastic bottle cap with Coca-Cola or some other pop in there. And the question is, it's like, that's very selective. Apparently, they do accept some technology.
Wait, these are the Amish or the Mennonites?
These are the Mennonites. But you can see that it starts out with a guy, with a bottle. And that bottle was not manufactured, neither the Coke in it. by the Amish, believe me, okay, or the Mennonites, okay.
That was
And
moonshine, not coke.
yeah, maybe it was, but they shun completely alcohol, okay, unlike me. Here's another piece of technology that you would think you would not find in an Amish or a Mennonite farm, and it's a tractor, and the guy's driving it. So they forbid anyone to use a car, but here you see a device that was not made in the Amish farms, believe me, please take my word for it, okay? It's got a motor, and the guy's driving it in the farm. You would think that all these people would be still, with a plow and the cow in front or the bull or whatever. No, they do it with tractors, and you say, hey, that's kind of selective. You accept that, you don't accept other things. So you try to wonder what their philosophy is if you can make sense of it.
Was the plow and bull also technically a type of technology? It's just outdated.
Exactly. Why didn't they do it with their hands? I mean, that would be correct, but instead they have the bull or the ox pulling on the plow, and that's cheating. That's cheating against God, I guess. They kick people out who even try to use technology. Here, this fella, he's a doctor. You can see all his doctoring things. That's their pharmacy. And he was kicked out because he used a phone. And the guy said he needed the phone because there are emergencies, like someone's in trouble and they have to get him to the hospital. So he said he needed a phone in order to call the ambulance and that sort of thing. And they said, no, we don't want a phone in here. Phones are forbidden, okay? And he did not accept that, and they kicked him out of the congregation. Okay, so he was out. And here's a fellow, and he's got a phone, okay, a cell phone, in fact, and he hides it so that the Amish don't see it. And since they don't watch TV, they'll never see this show, so he's safe there, okay? And the reason he's got it is because he wants to listen to music. He loves the music. Remember, the Amish and the Mennonites, they don't have music. They don't chant. They don't sing.
Really?
There's no singing, no music whatsoever. You would die there.
Yeah.
This guy listens to music every second, No music allowed in the Mennonite and Amish communities.
What's that about?
Oh, I guess you wake up the devil. Anyways, so the guy likes it, one, because he can talk, he can see things, right? He can see shows and so on. And the main one is that he's got music. He loves the music. He's enchanted with the music. So are his kids. So they all gather around and they say, okay, nobody's watching. Let's listen to music.
He's a devil worshiper.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. And he hides it even from his brother who came to visit.
Wait. How does he charge that phone?
I don't know.
It begs way more questions.
Yeah, raises more questions. Or does he have internet? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. What the fuck?
Maybe he does, but since the Amish wouldn't, or the Mennonites wouldn't know, how it's connected in his house, they probably wouldn't know what he's got in there. So what happens? A lot of the new breeds, okay, they leave the religion, or they become more liberal, and you see them driving trucks, okay, and they drive wagons and cars and whatever, okay. So they have their own church. They've created new churches, and you see total differences between all these Mennonite and Amish groups. Some like some things, some don't, and they have their own rules within each individual community.
How much technology they allow?
Yeah, essentially. And the issue is that their worry is that the world out there, the Gentiles, us, the English as they call them, they might, we're the devil. And so it's kind of tempting them with technology, saying, hey, guy, would you like to have this technology? It'll allow you to do this and that. You can talk and, and you can ride your car and so on. They see that as an invasion from the English-speaking world.
It's like the Dave Chappelle joke where he's like in his car on the highway and he sees a buggy next to him with the Amish there. And he's like, hey, Ezekiel, why are you going in that buggy? What? Huh? I can't hear you. Hold on, let me turn this air conditioning down. Just tempts him with technology.
Yeah. And so in their churches, in these modern day churches, the guys who are not so, they're more liberal, they're not as conservative, okay? They even have a cell phone. They don't have a Bible anymore. They read off of the cell phone, the Bible. So you can see the dangers that they see to their culture when the telephone invades them, okay? So this is their fear, okay?
That's how
Now,
powerful the smartphone is. It even got there. That's,
it
that's
even got
scary.
what?
The smartphone. It even got into the Amish community.
Yeah, it's
That's
so
scary.
powerful. It just penetrates any culture.
It's too useful.
Even the pygmies in the jungle, you know, they don't communicate with smoke signals anymore. Okay, and so what happens? There's a group of people. This is a special case. They talked about a family and a group of others, like 7 families, that were leaving their farms. They're beautiful farms. I mean, farms that you would love to live in. You know, everything's plowed. You have the crops growing. They have their house, their farmhouse, the barn, everything. The whole works. They have the machinery. And these people are leaving all that in Belize, little country in Central America. They're leaving all that and going to the jungles of Peru to start all over from scratch again. And we're talking about people who are around 50, maybe 45 to 50 years old. So it's not like they're 20 years old. These are older people, and they're going to the jungle, complete jungle, to the Amazon River, okay? And they're going to the jungle. They're going to be cutting the trees all over again, creating new land, building their new houses again, all over. They're starting all over from scratch. And they're doing it because they see that some of their neighbors are embracing the new technology.
Wow.
And they don't like that. They see, I guess, the devil within them. And so they're leaving. And the interesting part about that is they're going this far away. Okay, they're going from Belize, which is a little country there up at the top in Central America. They're going to Panama City. From Panama City, they take a connecting flight to Lima. And from Lima, they go to this place called Pucallpa. Nobody knows about it, okay? And it's in front of a river that branches into the Amazon River. And what is interesting, to get there, they have to take an airplane. And you see these Mennonites,
Oh, really?
going by airplane. You say, well, hold it, why don't they go with covered wagons?
They're just this one time, guys. One time. Let us get there. It's for good sense.
They even allow themselves to travel by car. It's just that they can't drive the car. But if someone takes them, like a taxi, takes them to the airport, that's okay.
What?
Yeah.
What
Someone's
kind
got
of
to take
that?
them. They have to have a designated driver.
I can use a smartphone as long as someone is holding it. If I'm not touching it, hey, dude, can you scroll for me? I'm trying to get to the next tweet.
Yeah. So okay, and this is the jungle paradise to which this fella is leaving his lands for.
Amazing.
That's it. Okay, that's where he's going. Okay. Now, one interesting thing about this is that he says that within the community, the neighbors, you know, they're all from the same religion. They know each other. They work together. They're all expert carpenters and farmers, etc. Probably metallurgic as well. In some cases, I think some Amish don't accept metal, but they live together. They know each other. They go to the same congregation, listen to the same sermons, etc. They build a house in 3 days. Now, it's not, the Empire State Building, okay? But I'm saying they build a house, a place where you can live in 3 days. And, I'm sure a lot of folk, especially young folk out there today, they say, oh, I have no place to live. When will I be able to buy my house? These guys buy a little bit of land. They work together. In 3 days, they have a house. It's no big deal for them. It's just, house? Oh, yeah, it's no biggie. And so that makes you stop and think. Yeah, they're well organized, okay? They're not stupid people, believe me, in that sense, okay? At least
they just prefer a simple lifestyle.
Yeah, it's
minimalist.
It's a desirable life in many ways for many people. A lot of people would like to have that freedom in the farms.
Well, not only that, there's a lot of people that also go into the woods to live in a cabin and stuff. Like, there's a lot of that that wanting to live
In
without
nature?
not only in nature, but like just without so much complication that technology does bring. And
The rat race.
yeah, the rat race.
You don't want the rat race. You don't want the nerves, mental problems, etc. These people say, hey, we live a peaceful life. We have a great life. They use the tractors instead of the plows, okay? They don't use cars. They don't use telephones. They have some trade-offs.
What do you think is their view on physics of the world? Do you think they're into...
I'll get into that. Give me a second. I'm almost there.
You're saying they're not quantum mechanics?
No. The issue is that, I'll get to it in 2 seconds. I'm almost there, okay? What we have to understand about these people, when they are mainly, since they came from Europe in the 17th century, that's the first group that came over, they were accepted, especially first of all in Pennsylvania. From there they moved to Ohio, and from there they moved to Indiana, and then spread out to other states. So most of them are in those 3 states. Okay, 2/3 of the Mennonites and I think Amish, all those groups, live in those 3 states. And there's 1/3, spread around. Again, colonization. They went out and conquered new lands, so to speak. Okay.
Do they vote? Man,
But-
I have so many questions.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Give me a second here. Let me finish up with this. And so this is the issue. The issue is they've had problems. They had problems, legal problems. They have been arrested, all for not following the rules. White man's rule, English, the English as they call them. Okay. Here's them going to the Supreme Court. They had a Supreme Court case. Why? Because they wanted to educate their own children. Homeschooling. And the Supreme Court sided with them here, but there were, all those cases are specific, and so they don't apply to everything. When a group went to Nebraska had some ordinance or some local law or whatever, and they said, no, you can't educate your own kids in your one room schoolhouses, okay? And they weren't able to win that battle, so they had to leave Nebraska and go back to Indiana or Ohio or Pennsylvania, wherever they were from. And here you see what I'm talking about. Here's a schoolhouse. That's their school. No college, nothing like that. They only go to 8th grade, 14 years old. That's it for the education. Then you go back to the farm because farming is their world. Okay, so they learn the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic.
Wow, what do they need arithmetic?
I guess to know 1 + 1 is
to measure.
No, there's more than that. Measuring is one, but there's another one which is they like money. Forget it. These are not completely people who are isolated entirely.
Wait, they have money?
They have money. They use dollars. I mean, how did they pay for their trip to go to Peru? With dollars.
True,
and why? Because they sell to the English, the people on the other side of the river. They produce crops, they sell them, they have their farmers markets and all this other stuff, and they do like money. And in fact, one of the reasons the fellow went to Peru was interesting, to Pucallpa or whatever it's called. He went there and he said, it's an ideal town for them. You say, what, this God-forsaken place? And it turns out that there's 200,000 people living in that little town in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the jungle. And what their idea is to sell to those people. That's their market. They want to make money. Okay, so they're not completely isolated from money. And of course they have what you could call economies of scale, where they have an advantage over the locals, because the locals probably have gardens. And so there was this lady, she's alone, and she's selling, I think it was apples, and she was selling them in the beach. Well, once these guys get installed and they start doing their thing, they're going to beat all the competition because they're well organized. Again, there are many of them working together. They work like a family, and it's maybe 7, 8, 10 families to start out with. Eventually there'll be 20, 30, 40, 100. Okay. In fact, let me cover another issue. Another reason they went to prison. Here you see Amish going to prison. Okay, I think these are Amish, not Mennonites. They go to prison because they're conscientious objectors. They are pacifists. They don't want to go to war. They are peace-loving people. They're like Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, so here they're taken into prison because they refused to go to war during the Second World War. World War II.
They do dress pretty swanky, I gotta say.
Yeah, I mean,
In
you
every
can recognize.
picture.
And you can see that they're not handcuffed and there's no guns pointing at them. They know these guys walk into prison. They're not dangerous at all. It's just that they're taken in there because they refuse to go to war. Okay, that's the issue. Finally, they let them off the hook. They put some laws out there that said they can do the military service, but in non-combat duties. And that's where they're at today, okay? Now, the interesting part that I saw also about this is their population explosion. That's got to do a lot with my theory of extinction, okay? Just want to mention that in case someone has questions today about that. And where is it? Here. This is their population, how it's exploded. 17th century, before 17th century, 1780, I think 1683, that's when they came for the first time. And we're a few families, so you can see the dots are on the bottom. Very few, hundreds, we're talking about hundreds at most. And then in the 20th century, you can see how that's gone up. Today there's almost 300,000. Depending on one count. I saw another count, half of that, 150,000. But you can say that today we have, between Amish and Mennonites, all these groups, between 150 and 300,000 people in the United States. Okay? So you can see the population has exploded. And no kidding, they have 7 kids apiece. So they're large families, all of them. Okay? All they do all night. I mean, there's no other entertainment. Okay, so you can see
the wheel and the stick, and that guy with the cell phone. he's...
No. The biggest entertainment there is playing tag and hide and seek. That's more or less where it stands today. Okay, and so here are some of the questions for you to ponder today. You can ask questions along these lines if you want, just to stimulate your mind a little bit. Okay, and so these are the issues. Okay. Many would like to be farmers and enjoy a more natural life, far from the hustle and bustle of congested city. I'm talking about us, everybody, normal people, the Gentile, or whatever you want to call us. Many are hostile to and loathe the technological world, specifically related to food processing, husbandry, you know, how we grow chickens and cows and the antibiotics we put into them, etc., etc., etc. Pollution, vaccines coming up, okay, around the world, and health in general. People go to the hospital and they don't trust the doctors, etc., okay? Many would like to leave the rat race and live in a community where neighbors help and care for each other. Oh, a lot of people would love that. Okay, we don't see that. We're all in million people cities, and we're all individuals. There's a million individuals. We're all hermits.
There's no community.
Yeah, there's no community. You don't even know who your next door neighbor is. These guys, you know, they're 50 people maybe, and they all know each other. And they go to the same church. They work together. If they have to build a house, they do it. If there's an emergency, they all work together. So here's the question. You know, would those same individuals who love all this stuff, right? Who would like maybe to join a commune, live in this communism, okay? Be willing to sacrifice their personal way of thinking and technology, okay, in exchange for the good of the community. And here's some examples. These people use what is known as plain dress. So if you go there, for example, you became one of those, you may have to dress like this. Okay, you see the girls and the guys.
The dudes look cool.
Well, the girls
look. It looks like a barbershop quartet over here.
Yeah, and then you know you might have to plow with your hands. Yeah, you have to have a beard to show that you're no longer a kid. Okay, you can buy a fake one, I guess. No music, no electricity, no football. Most exciting pastime again, tag and maybe hide and seek. Entertainment at Sunday school. That's known as entertainment. No cars, caveman dentistry and docks, you know, it's with hammer and chisel. And no phone or internet, and yeah, no beer. Ooh. Man, that is...
Ooh, it was good until that last one.
Yeah, it's the one that turned me off. I said, no, I don't want to
be... You were thinking about it, should I go in, should I go in? Ah, no, not the beer.
When they said no beer, I said, no, I don't think I can take that. Okay? And because their populations have expanded so fast, guess what? Be prepared for this.
They went extinct.
It's a microcosm of humans in general on Earth. Okay, and here it is. Here's the graph.
Uh-oh.
Well, not the graph, but I mean the two big problems that they have. One is genetic disorders hit Amish hard. This article came, what was it, 2005, says the Amish make up only 10% of the population in whatever county, Geauga County in Ohio, but they're half of the special needs cases. 3 of the 5 Miller children, for example, have a mysterious crippling disease that has no name and no known cure. The 3 Byler sisters were all born with a condition that has no cure and mysteriously leads to severe mental retardation and a host of physical problems. Last year, doctors figured out the girls have the gene for something called Cohen syndrome. There are only 100 known cases worldwide, and these guys have like 20 or 30 cases now of this. Since then, more than a dozen other cases of Cohen's have been discovered in Ohio, Amish country. They're also having gays, homosexuals. There's a site known as LGBT Amish.
Wait, how do they have a website?
Yeah, they had to leave the congregation.
Oh, I was
they
going
were
to
kicked
say,
out. No, they were
Amish
kicked
with
out.
a website. What?
They were kicked out. They liked the life over there, but they were kicked out of the community for being gay, homosexual, whatever. And so, again, you might have to, first, on the one hand, you might have to sacrifice your way of thinking, your individuality, for the good of the community. That's one issue. And remember how that's done. They choose a leader, and that leader is the guy who's going to kind of, take them by the nose and say, this is what we should do, folks. And he kind of recommends, but he's got a group of people who stand behind him, and so they impose that upon their small community. And their communities are not extensive. Each community is maybe anywhere from 50 to 100 people. Maybe 10 families or whatever.
How does that work with the population boom, though? Every time they get to a certain population, branch
They
off?
branch out. A lot of them migrate. In fact, as you saw if I can put this up again. Where was it? If I can find it. Population. This one here. You can see that you have the colonization phase, which was up to 1900 maybe. They were still having immigrants. And after that, immigration stopped, and all that was, the rest of it was reproduction from the seed that was in the United States. So all the people living today come from maybe 12,000, 6,000 individuals, who in turn, most of them come from the original families that came to the United States. So you're talking about a founder's effect, and since then, you've got, everybody has the same grandfather. Okay, so if you intermarry, no matter how many generations, at some point it's going to catch up with you. Then you're going to start seeing some of these genetic problems, which is my argument also for homosexuality, that it's happening today among humanity because we've been inbreeding for 200,000 years. And we are 8 billion, but the Amish are only like 2 million on the planet total. So they're a drop of water in the global population, but you can see where the problem is. If you have inbreeding for extensive periods of time, you're going to come up with all these genetic type problems. Okay, and so I think it's a good indicator. It's a good marker, a kind of milestone, something for you to gauge what's going on out there. Okay,
real quick.
Yeah,
it's usually correlated with their inbreeding that they have genetic disorders, but could that also be
education?
No, like how they live. Maybe that's why they have so many genetic
Well,
problems.
I think no one lives better than them in that sense. In
What
the
I'm
sense
saying
that
is-
they have a very natural life. They eat well. They wake up with a rooster. They go to sleep with the chickens. It's like they have a good life in that sense. It's a farmer's life. It's a very tranquil, very peaceful life. Mm-hmm. So they have I don't think they have any nervous problems over there, like in the city, So I don't think it's more than that. It's just genetic, most of it. I don't know, maybe there's another factor. The weather, the food, I don't think so. But yeah, there could be some other issue. But I think it's primarily genetics, okay? And this is the issue. Those who know Calhoun's experiment, you had also a founder's effect. Calhoun started with 8 mice and ended up with homosexuals and autists at the end of his experiment, especially universe number 25. And, this is just father having kids, having grandkids, having great grandkids, and finally, they're marrying amongst themselves, and what are you going to get out of that? It's a colony that's just inbreeding constantly, and that can't go on forever. Okay, I'm going to answer some of the questions, some of the comments that people made, and then we open up the floor for questions, live questions. Okay, let's go with the first one. So we move on here. Okay, a fellow says in relation to Prometheus, the story I told the other day about Prometheus giving fire to man and then being punished by Zeus. Tied to a mountain, let an eagle eat his liver or his guts, whatever. And this guy also raises the tree of knowledge, and you can also raise Noah's Ark and some of the other tales that you read in the Bible and other holy books. And he says, is it not possible that the ancients knew about the cycles of civilizations and a whole lot more, and created these allegories as ways to educate generations that followed? Okay. Well, all I can do is give you my opinion on that, okay? And that's that I think all these fables came, or stories, tales, they came when people, here you have shepherds, okay? Now, how much education does a shepherd have? All he does is tend to sheep every day, okay? That's what a lot of them did, especially in the Middle East, okay? Nice weather, they had that was their life. And so here they are, maybe in the evening, around the campfire, maybe they've got the cattle or whatever they have out there, and they're looking at the night sky and they see stars. They don't know what that is. They say, what is all this? Where are we? And so they started inventing stories, and that were passed on from generation to generation, where the guy said, well, there was this guy named God, and he waved his magic wand and created the universe. Another guy would say, yeah, he created man and God. He took some mud, some clay, put it together, blew life into them. And the other guy said, yeah, and there was this guy Noah, and he went with his family, on a trip and so on. So they came up with all these stories, and added to that, by the time you get to the Greeks, you get stories like Prometheus, and there's a lot of stories. The Greek mythology is very rich in stories. They're all great stories. Okay, but they had to explain certain things, and so they introduced the gods, and they said, well, this god did this, and we had this other guy, the guy for the wind. He's the guy that blew your house away, and so he didn't like you. You didn't pray to him or whatever. So they came up with all these stories, and again, these people were not. They were intelligent for what they had to do for farming, for cattle ranching, that sort of thing. But they were not sophisticated in the sense they didn't have university degrees or the knowledge that we have accumulated today through decades and centuries. They didn't have that. They didn't know what electricity is. Now, they knew what some of them, at some point they knew what magnetism is, because suddenly, they put their spear or their sword close to a lodestone. They say, oh, this is attracting my sword. I don't know why, magic, the gods are talking to me,
Yeah, I think they were giving names to the reoccurring events that they kept seeing. Like whenever they see thunderbolts, they give that one, oh, that's that god.
Yeah, that's
they
one
see
issue.
Certain things,
but
war is that guy.
But they didn't have a god of gravity, which to me is astounding, because they realized that whenever they dropped something, everything always fell to the ground. And they said,
I guess it was a given.
They must have asked themselves, why does it go to the sky? They must have asked that question at some point. Someone must have asked that question. And so they said, well, I don't know.
Because gravity's so fundamental that you take it for granted. It's like breathing. I don't think they didn't have a god for air either.
No, they had
a god for wind.
Aeolus. Well, yeah.
Wind is different, but not like breathing. It's like they're not thinking on that level, because there's some things that are so fundamental that you kind of don't even notice them.
Well, that's why they called it one of the fundamental elements, because they couldn't see it. They could breathe it. They said, what am I breathing? What is going into my nose? They must have, or they moved their hands and they said, oh, I'm touching something, but I don't see it. So they must have asked these questions for sure. And they say, well, let's call it air. And then that's what they called it, And so I don't think they had knowledge or at least understanding. Okay, what they had was worldly wisdom on how to behave in society. And if you look at the Bible, I mean, I've read it 3 times. And what you'll see is how to behave in society. You read the Quran, same exact thing, how you should behave.
Through analogy.
Yeah, because they have to invent stories and analogies and so on, or parables, whatever, like saying, you better behave like this because this is what's God is going to punish you. What does that mean? Society is going to punish you. That's God. If you don't behave like you should,
act like an asshole, you're getting slapped. Basically.
Yeah. So I think it had to do with that. Okay, let me go with the next one here. So we move on and get ready to answer questions. One fellow says, simple minds understand simple things. Genius understands complex. Okay, I think he missed one, and I'm just going to add to that, okay? And I'm going to say, and irrational minds don't understand at all, whether simple or complex, okay? So
that reminds me of something my brother keeps saying. Whenever he sees me being happy with something simple, he's like, simple mind, simple pleasures.
Yeah. And so here's the definition of irrational, so we know what we're talking about. We had to define the word irrational so that people just don't use it loosely and say, oh, you're irrational. Why? Well, because you don't think like me. No, that's not the way it works. That's an opinion. Here we have some criteria, and just very briefly, treating concepts as objects, number 1. Okay, then you have using inconsistent definitions or undefined words. Theory inconsistent with the assumptions that you put. You put some assumption, then I always give the example briefly. The prosecutor presents a gun and says, and here's the weapon. And then his theory is about how the guy got stabbed or how he got poisoned. It doesn't follow from what he presented, which was the gun, that sort of thing. Describing and claiming to have explained. Mathematicians do this all the time. They describe, they think they have explained something. No. Explanation, description, 2 different things. And then the mechanism proposed doesn't work or cannot even be imagined. Particle at 2 places at once. Please try to imagine that. We're talking about the same particle, not a particle broken in 2, okay? We're talking about the same particle, your cat at 2 places at once. That's what we're talking about.
I mean, I guess if you can't imagine the explanation, then
that's
you
irrational.
Didn't understand it. Either you didn't understand it or it's an irrational explanation.
And that's what we call it. We call it an irrational. So those are the criteria for irrationality. So we have objective criteria for what we mean by irrational. It's not an opinion. It's objective criteria. Okay, let's move on here. Another fellow makes another common question. He says, let me get it here. Could a shift in understanding about electromagnetism as threads instead of particles lead to new inventions? I don't think so. The way I look at it, we don't care about inventions. Science is science, well, yeah, I know, but let's start there. Science is science and technology is technology. Technology has to do with inventions. Science does not have to do with inventions. Now, we have these threads. We say, look, in the case of magnetism, you got the threads, a wall of threads, just many walls of threads, by the way, just spinning around, the other one in the other direction. That produces attraction. And then they go in the opposite direction. They hit each other and push each other away. Knowing that, assuming we certify or believe in it or whatever you want to call it, will that allow you to create some new technology? We already can do a lot of stuff with magnets without understanding, and we've done it for the last 100 years, without understanding exactly the mechanism. What is the invisible stuff that Mother Nature has there? Here you have 2 magnets, okay? There it is. They stick together. So you don't see anything in there, do you? Yeah, between them?
No.
Okay, and see, they stick.
What?
Yeah, so magic, okay? And so there's something there. And you got to identify that something, but that's science. But this part, the fact that you say, oh, it sticks together, I think I can use that for something. Yeah, I know, I'll put it on the TV and hold, or on the refrigerator door and hold, stick something on there. So you can do that. You can use technology without understanding the foundation, the underlying mechanism. That's what I'm saying. We do it all the time. I mean, electricity, these guys don't understand it. They think it's a bunch of beads that go from atom to atom. It's irrational. We cannot even imagine the atom that they're talking about, the planetary atom. because we don't understand why the electron beam doesn't fly away or fall to the center of the nucleus, to the nucleus of the atom. So they don't understand it, but they don't need to understand it to be able to do something with it. That's the point. If I know that, I let go of this ball, right? And, and it tends to go down. Let's do it with this one. It weighs less. You let go of the ball, and it falls on always downwards. But once you know that, you don't need to know what gravity is. All you need to do is, hey, I know what I can do with this. I can do some kind of technology with this, knowing that it always falls to the center of the earth. Mm. So all you need to know is the effect. You don't need to know the cause, the mechanism. That's my point. Okay.
So you're saying that since we have so much technology without knowing the actual causes, mechanisms, knowing the mechanism wouldn't give us new technology. But I would disagree because the more you know about the true nature of the world, it's just more clues that you can use to build technology. I'm not saying that there will be new technology off of this. I'm just saying any piece of information that lets you navigate reality better gives you better chances at building new technologies.
I'll take it back. He's not my smartest son, okay? Okay, let's go with the next question or comment. I hope you will produce a scientific lexicon. We have produced one, and I called it the Foundations of Physics, okay? And it looks more or less like this, okay? And first of all, we have to announce what the golden principle, what I call the golden principle, which is physics requires an object. You can't do physics without an object. So the first word you got to define is an object, or otherwise known as something. And something, that which has shape. Opposite is nothing, so they're antonyms. Now you can use these two words consistently. One is that which has shape, the other one is that which doesn't have shape. We're done.
They're mutually exclusive.
Yeah, in other words, one has shape, the other one doesn't have shape. It's very simple. Concept, distance, location, exist, and motion. Those are the key words that you need to do physics. There's a couple others, maybe dimension. You need to know what straight means. You need to know what perpendicular means, angle, that sort of thing. But in general, those are the key words that we need to start physics. You can't do physics without those words.
Mainly because you're bound to end up using those words.
When you need, right, you're gonna at some point or other you're gonna use those words, and especially the word something. You need to know what something is, because you can't do. There's no phenomenon occurring without a something in there. And so when we see, like we just saw gravity and magnetism, and you say, well, I don't see anything, I can't touch anything there. That's not the definition of something. Okay, definition of something, that which has shape.
Whether you see it or not.
Whether you see it or not, because it's not the touch criterion or criteria. It's shape. Does it have shape? If it has shape, it's something. Okay, and so we have all these somethings in nothing. And in is a big word, but we'll just use that.
Are we going to define in now?
Yeah.
And
we have something in nothing, meaning somehow something cannot escape nothing, because nothing has no border to cross. That's what it means. It's not a container. It's just that it's a lack of container, so there is no border to cross. See, if you're in a container, you're God. Well, you can at least, almighty, all powerful. Yeah, you can go through the container because you're magical. Okay, no problem. But if there is no container, not even God can escape.
If there's no
wherever, because there's no border to cross. There's nothing you can put your foot across and say, "Oh, I'm finally out." There's no such thing.
I guess technically you're not in anything anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why the "in" goes with quotations.
You're in nothing.
You're nothing.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, just means that there is nothing to cross. That's what "in" means in that sense. Not in the sense of container that it's got walls and you can reach you're within the walls. That's the distinction there. Okay, here's another question, comment.
Where do you get these?
Folks who watched the previous shows, and they ask questions. Rational science is about ideas, yeah, whereas empirical science is about experiences connected to the real world. Okay, I thought rational science has to do with the real world, but okay, interpretation. A hypothesis proposes a tentative, not certain or fixed, provisional, done without confidence, hesitant, explanation or prediction. In other words, fellow says that a hypothesis is an explanation or a prediction. Okay, and the question is whether an explanation and prediction are the same thing.
Those are big differences.
Yeah, I mean, is it a prediction or is it an explanation? Which one is it? Because those two are not synonyms. That's the issue. Okay, and then he says a theory, on the other hand, is a substantiated explanation for an occurrence. Theories rely on tested and verified data. Okay, that's just proof. That means you're going to be convinced of something. And scientists widely accepted theories to be true. True also is opinion. What is true to you is a lie to your neighbor, though not unimpeachable. If it's unimpeachable or impeachable, then it's not true. I mean, true means absolute truth, I would think, right? But the interesting thing here is this fellow also gave some examples of what he was talking about, and he says the following. He says, he gives these examples, and what they are, they're all mathematical examples. You know, if you just read through them real quick, they all come from mathematics. And the question is, he's saying that it's an explanation or prediction. What's all these examples have to do with what he just said? So that's the first issue I raise. None of his examples, the one he gave, have anything to do with theory or with explanation or even with prediction for that matter. They're just descriptions, mathematical descriptions. That's the first issue. There's a second issue, and that's this. Okay, and it's, again, this is our rational scientific method, and here you can see the difference with what he proposed. Hypothesis is not a theory. It's not an explanation or a prediction. A hypothesis is an assumption.
This is usually 90% of the thing.
Yeah.
This is where all the bulk comes
from.
Yeah,
because you got to figure out, in the case of invisible entities, what invisible entities out there. That's why the assumption is important here.
Before we begin moving the invisible entities, what can we imagine them to be like?
Right. That's the issue. And so the hypothesis includes the objects. We include also the definitions and the initial scene. What is your movie starting from? You know, what are the few frames of your movie so that we can get your starting point, okay? And then you can explain your mechanism, which is what the theory is about. And again, this is as applied to physics. And finally, the conclusions. So you can see there's a difference between what this fellow proposes and what we're proposing, okay? Then there's this other issue, and that's that there's a difference between an explanation and a description. Okay, an explanation is the causes, in the case of physics, or reasons, in the case of philosophy, underlying a phenomenon. How or why a consummated event happened. An explanation deals exclusively with the past. Science deals only with consummated events, okay? And describe, on the other hand, is a listing of properties of physical objects. And we use adjectives to describe objects and adverbs to describe or characterize motion, qualify motion. And final issue here, there's one more. So let's get that one in there as well. And get ready for the questions in a little while. Okay, and we don't do predictions in science. Okay, so you're in the wrong forum, fellow. You got to go see Mrs. The palm reader, gal with the crystal ball. I think her name is Krupskaya, and she's got at least a 50% rate in.
She's got a magical coin, right? She flips half the time. It's correct.
She's got 50% success rate. You know what I mean? So
well, science is almost unanimously equated with making predictions and then having them come true. Oh, this dude must be onto something because something happened that didn't happen yet that he saw coming. So he must have some knowledge into the ether.
Yeah, but see,
the nature of the world.
Let me show you that. Example I always give that puts that in the proper light. You have an eclipse, okay? And it turns out that, the mathematicians come to you and says, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, there's going to be an eclipse. And 2 o'clock, it happens. There is an eclipse. So far, we have a description. That's all we have. A prediction is only a description. Now, you say, well, how did you know that? And the guy says, well, what's he going to do? He's going to have to draw on his memory, on his experience. We've had eclipses in the past. He's calculated those orbits, etc. And now he said, okay, one's due now. You know, Halley's Comet is due after 75 years. Why does he know that? Well, he knows that because we call it a prediction. It's not really a prediction, okay? In the sense that, in other words, all he's got is a description. All he's saying, he's not telling you why. He's not telling you the cause, the mechanism. All he's saying, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, you know, he could be guessing for all we know.
So you're saying a prediction could be devoid of an explanation.
It is.
And thus, even if you make the correct prediction, even if what you said comes to pass, that doesn't necessarily mean your explanation of what your prediction was is even on point.
That's not the point. The point is, in other words, if he can explain why it's going to come to pass, he's drawing on experience. He's talking about the past. He's talking about consummated event. He's explaining. Explanation, you can only explain consummated events. You cannot explain what hasn't happened. That's the point. Yeah. The point is, as soon as he can explain it, he's doing science because now he's talking about the past. That's okay. Predictions have to do with the future. They're outside the bounds of science. Science only deals with consummated events, with things that happen that you want to explain. You want to explain, gravity. And you say, why did the ball fall to the floor? First, you got to throw the ball or let go of the ball, let it fall to the floor. Now you have an event. Now you have to explain it. That's the way it works. But you can say, well, I can predict that if I let go of the ball, it's going to fall to the floor. Well, how do you know that? Well, let me explain. How are you going to know that if you didn't have the experience to begin with? You had to have the experience.
So the answer to why will that happen in 2 hours is always because I've seen it before. Yeah. And then from I've seen it before is, okay, then let's explain that.
Right. Yeah. So, and for that you have to draw on your experience.
It always gets delegated to the past eventually.
Yeah, no matter what. Okay, another question, comment here. Fella says, we can weigh the difference of a dead battery and a charged battery. It has mass that we can weigh. And here you have my batteries, Durabil. And there you have the car battery, the Bill battery. Okay, I manufacture
How much time did you spend on this picture? That's all I want to know. Was it worth the joke?
So I have my garage here. I build these things. I sell them. So if you need to buy Durabills or the car Bill battery, let me know. But here, you're weighing a battery. Okay, so you weigh the battery. What have we learned about science? So it weighs. So I weigh myself before eating. I weigh myself after eating. And there's a difference.
Well, I'm sure,
Great.
I'm sure there's a context that's missing here.
No. He says he has more mass and less mass depending on whether you weigh it before or after it's charged or not charged.
Was he saying that mass exists? Or what?
No, what he's saying that charge has mass. And so all he said is love has intelligence. That's all we have. This concept has this other concept. That's all he said so far. So far we have no physics. We have no physical entity in front of us. What are we talking about? What physical object, what has happened?
What are we imagining?
Or what has happened? Yeah, I mean, what event has happened? What do we have to explain here? So just to describe and say, look, I weighed myself, and I don't want to tell you my weight yet. And then I eat 3 pounds of food, and then I weigh a little more, okay, later on. So there's a difference. What have I explained so far? All I have is 2 descriptions, a mathematical description. I weigh 195, I weigh 195 pounds plus 3 more pounds, 198.
That's a lot of food.
Yeah, so if you can take it. So the question is, or during the week, whatever. I gained 3 pounds.
The only thing you explained is that you can eat a lot.
Yeah, in other words, so far you haven't explained anything. All you did was give me a description of a before and after, a mathematical description. What have you explained? I mean, it's like saying, look, the chair is white, but look, I'm going to paint it brown. Now the chair is brown. So we have before and after, white and brown. And what have we learned? Well, where's the science? That's the issue. So yeah, the fact that you can weigh battery before and after charge doesn't tell us anything. You haven't told us what charge is. What physical entity is this thing you call charge?
All we're saying
Or
is
mass, for that matter.
something changed.
Yeah, all you're saying is something changed mathematically because you put a standard, the kilogram, the pound, whatever you put out there. And in terms of that standard that you created, that artificial standard, you say, before it weighed so many kilograms and afterwards it weighed more kilograms or less or whatever. What have we learned? All we did was give a result in terms of predefined standards. And we don't know why. We don't know the cause why the battery weighs more. What happened? What penetrated? A ghost? Was it a spirit that went into the battery when you charged it? Does the spirit weigh 3 more pounds now? Or whatever. Okay, moving on here. 2 more issues, and then we're opening the floor up for questions. Okay, so get them ready. We're going to go through the questions people asked in a minute here. There is no scientific definition of object. That's what I said, and he says, so why do you continue with the scientific definition of object is that which has shape? Well, again, remember what I just said, and let me say it one more time, and that's that we have the foundations of physics, and physics requires an object, something that the mathematical so-called physicists have not discovered in 10,000 years. You do need a physical object to do physics. You can't do it with concepts. You can't move energy, you can't move mass, you can't move field around or charge or time or whatever. You can't bend time. You can't bend or move or weigh concepts. You can only do that with objects. Again, if we charge the battery and it weighs more, then you got to tell me what charge is. What is this? Is this a ghost? A spirit? What is this charge thingy? Okay.
When you said there is no scientific definition of object, I'm sure you're meaning there hasn't been one for the mainstream science or whatever.
Yeah, and the main reason is they had no use for the word object, for the word thing, for the word something, because they don't do physics with objects.
They use math.
They've been using concepts and math, equations and concepts. So they created mathematical concepts, abstract concepts such as mass, energy, field, charge, force, wave. All these are concepts. And so they had to use concepts. Why? Because they couldn't see or touch the invisible entities that Mother Nature uses to run her shop. And because of that, they say, well, we can't see it or touch it, and we'll never figure it out. So let's not worry about that. Let's just describe mathematically what happened here from the visible things. So if the air somehow pushes the chair, right, a gust of air comes and pushes the chair over, you don't see the air. You can touch it, but let's assume you can't touch it either, just for the sake of argument. It moves the chair. You say, okay, air hit the chair. I don't know what air is, but I'm just going to note how many yards the chair moved, what was the force, what was the energy, what was the mass of the chair. You know, all those are descriptions. You still don't know what air is, and until you visualize it, you will not figure out the mechanism why the chair moved. Okay? All you're doing is describing in mathematical terms using predetermined, in other words, artificial standards, such as the kilogram, how much energy, how many ergs or whatever you're going to use, field, charge, 1.6 times 10 to the minus 19 coulombs, whatever you're going to use in there, you're just going to describe it in terms of those units that we created. You go to another planet, they have other units. They won't understand any of this. They don't know what a kilogram is. Yeah, the land of the Klingons. Okay, final question or issue. I think same fellow. Just because we don't fully understand electricity doesn't mean it's conceptual. Well, for that we have to define what an object is and what a concept is. Very simple. And so object, that which has shape. What is a concept? A word that invokes 2 objects, or embodies, right? Or 2 words treated as objects. For example, motion. Motion means a single object at 2 locations. So you treat that as 2 objects because you're establishing a relation between one location of the object and another. So you're treating them as two distinct objects. And we have all kinds of examples for that. So the point is that's a concept. Anything that moves is a concept. Does electricity move? Electricity hopefully is a dynamic concept, therefore, so it's not a physical object. You can't point to electricity because, first of all, it doesn't stand still. And second, it involves, assuming you take the official version and the motion of the electron bead from one atom to another, that's electricity, that's a concept. The objects are the little ball that they're moving, the atom, those are the objects. The motion, the movie of electricity, that's a concept.
I guess a good example.
Dynamic concept.
A good example for that would be fire.
Yeah.
Where fire, there's something moving there, but it's really it's not
Combustion.
fire.
It's
Fire,
combustion.
yeah, fire isn't a thing. It's just the atoms that are doing their combustion thing.
Yeah, and
Those are the real objects. There's
yeah.
no object called fire.
Yeah, the object is oxygen. The oxygen atom, okay, or molecule. Okay, and just in case, final comment, all words in the dictionary can be placed under two categories, object and concept. Every word in the dictionary is either an object or a concept. Either it designates that which has shape or that which doesn't. Why doesn't? Because it involves two objects or more, or two words that we're going to treat as objects. For example, space and matter, okay, for universe. Objects we point to and name, concepts we can't point to, okay, we define. So we don't define objects and we don't point to concepts. Point to love, point to energy, point to mass, and we'll know what you're pointing to, okay? And then you will see the word electricity right there next to the last on the right-hand side. So electricity is a concept. In fact, it's a dynamic concept.
Isn't it easier to define concepts as that which doesn't have shape?
No, I don't think that's a good definition. Why was it? See if I can remember why. I'll give you an answer later. You stumped me. I know there's a reason we don't define it as that which doesn't have shape for concepts.
And
okay?
real quick,
That's just by the way, that's a good rule of thumb. Okay, when you go through the dictionary, you say, okay, love, does that have shape or doesn't it have?
Can you imagine it?
Yeah, it's black and white. Energy, can you imagine the shape? No. So immediately, as a rule of thumb, that's good as a first line of attack to say that's a concept, that's an object. The correct definition is a relationship. That's a synonym, but it's a word that invokes two objects because you're essentially making a comparison, a relationship between two objects, no matter what concept you look at. And again, you can test it with all kinds of concepts, and that's the challenge there. Find me a concept that does not involve two objects.
Real quick, in which one of those?
Oh, you got one.
Yeah. In which one of those categories does space fall under?
Space, nothing. Okay, and yeah, we say that space is an antonym of object. First of all, that which has shape. That's one issue. And then the other one is, yeah, it doesn't have shape, for sure.
So it's not an object, but is it a concept?
It's a concept because the concept is nothing.
But it's
the concept is nothing.
But it's not a relation between two objects.
In a way it is because you're comparing it against the object, the matter of the universe.
But it isn't an object.
Yeah, I guess.
There's a loophole there.
It could be. Okay, I got to think about that a little more. Good. So see, he's not the most intelligent of my kids. He's just
I'm the most annoying. I just like getting under people's skin.
Okay, let's begin with the questions. Put my son to work today.
Not that many questions. I got more questions about the Amish, but
okay, yeah, anything goes. Okay, so you handle that now.
Good evening, Bill and Ons. Leibniz said there was 300 years ago that stars evolve into planets. I mean, questions. There weren't that many questions.
Okay.
I saw
or one. Anything.
I saw one somewhere in here.
Well, don't go through all of them so quick.
Yeah, here. Why am I conscious right before the extinction? Is consciousness emergent? I don't know what that means. Is consciousness emergent?
Consciousness is not a physical object. Essentially, we deal primarily with objects here. So consciousness is a word that belongs to religion. Okay, anyone using the word consciousness, I know for sure has a problem with religion.
Ashkenazis apparently descend from 950 individuals. They have around 90 unique genetic disorders such as Tay-Sachs.
Very, very likely, yeah, because again, small communities tend to have those kinds of problems. If they inbreed,
I'm gonna hold my breath. What happens? My breathe. Sorry. Scrolling down. Trying not to skip any questions. Yeah, they're pretty much here, the newest ones. Let me scroll a little bit.
Maybe you're going too fast.
No, I was reading this the whole time.
Okay.
How does nothing weigh something in the difference of battery charged versus uncharged?
Well, what you have to identify is what physical object. I mean, we can call it charge, we can call it energy, we can call it mass, we can call it whatever we want. The issue is, what are we talking about? Can we draw the thing that went in there? What went into the battery? That's what you got to explain. And for that, if you're the presenter, you're the guy giving the dissertation, you got to tell the crowd, look, this is what I say is in there. That's what went into the battery. That's the issue. The issue is, I don't care if it suddenly has more coulombs in there, so now we have more charge. So who cares about that? I mean, the question, that's a mathematical description. We need to find out what spirit, what ghost went into the battery. That's the key. That's where science comes in, because now you have to break your brain and say, okay, let us assume this charge thingy is this thing here, and you point to it, you draw it, you bring it to the conference, you make a mock-up of it, and maybe you bring a ball and you say, look, this is charged. This is what went into the battery. Okay, so how did it go? Well, it went in there like this, and now you explain the mechanism. That's science. But to say that, the battery now weighs more,
well, I was gonna
it's like saying I eat food and I weigh more. Okay,
I was gonna say that anytime something weighs more, that means something went into it. But it gets tricky because of velocity, which also mimics weight.
But we're talking about mechanics here, a mechanical process where you say, if I ask you how did the box go up, you say I pulled the rope through the pulley and that's how I pulled the box up. Since you see all the objects, you understand it. Even a baby understands that. But if you just do the thing without the rope, you say, how did the box go up? You say, oh, it was magic. It was energy. It was charge. What are we explaining with that? We can't see the objects. We need to see the object. You have to be able to illustrate, make a movie of your theory. If you cannot, you're not doing physics. You're doing maybe math, but not physics. Physics is with physical objects.
Can you explain ropes and frequency that is used every day?
Huh? Can you explain?
Can you explain ropes in frequency that is used every day?
Oh yeah, in fact, I think I've done that several times now. I don't know if you're a new guy. Here's a rope, okay? Frequency is the number of links. So let's say, how many do we have there? Maybe 2, 3, maybe 3, okay? Now we untorque it, okay?
That's a bad prop. You can barely see it, but yeah.
And now you have maybe 2 links, and each one is longer. So the reason, and it's related to the wave equation, little c, which is a constant, the velocity of light, okay? 300,000 kilometers per second rounding off. And what does that equal to? Frequency times wavelength. When the frequency goes up, the wavelength goes down. And the rope mimics that perfectly. I mean, that is the equation of a rope. Why? Because when the frequency, in other words, the number of links are many, then each link is smaller, is shorter, and vice versa. When the links are greater for the same amount of rope, you have fewer links. That's it. That's the relationship of frequency to light through a rope.
Do you still think a square is a standalone object?
Yes. If God, all he made is a square in the universe. I don't know how he made it sit there. I don't see the back of it, because as soon as you turn a square, it becomes a rectangle. So it's got to be straightforward to me, right? That's the only way you can see a square. And if that's the only object God made, he said, what is that, Bill? That's a square. Okay, that's it. That's the only thing that exists.
Wait, that means you're there and God's there.
Also,
something's off here.
No, but we're spirits. Okay, so yeah, square is a standalone object. In other words, I don't need any other object to understand the word square. Now, square, let's keep in mind, square is only a face of a cube or a rectangular shape of some kind. Okay, so it's one of the ends, one of the sides. We call that a square. But we don't need the cube. I don't need to see the rest of the cube to understand the word square. That's not the case with, for example, the halo of an angel. If the angel's not there, that's a ring or a plate, right? If I want to call that a halo, I need the angel because that makes it holy. That makes it a halo.
Okay, interesting. Maybe you should call people love instead of people. Then you could point to love.
Okay, I'll point to love. This guy, that's my love.
Wait, what about water? Water doesn't have shape, neither does gas. They
Not
float
true.
everything.
In fact, if you look at one of the 2 videos that I put up, one of the 5 videos I put up there, I show that is the case. Anything made out of atoms is has shape. Anything.
Well, I guess
I mean,
it's not so much the thing that it's made of, but the atoms themselves do have shape.
First of all, the atoms.
It's the amalgamation of the atoms that we
Right.
call water.
But this is the issue. When we point to a table, we treat it as a single piece when we say table. We're not thinking, oh, a table is gazillion atoms. No, so is an elephant, so is a rock, a tree. Everything is gazillions of atoms. Me, I'm a gazillions of atoms. So we're all the same? Are we going to just talk about what everything is made of? So we don't say, oh, a table is gazillion atoms. No, we say a table is that, what I'm pointing to. Okay, that shape. We treat it as a single piece object, just like the square. We don't say, well, what is the square made of? Little squares? No, we don't care about any of that. We say that's a square. The word square refers to that image that I see in front of me. And this is no different. You see an object, for example, or you don't see it, like in the case of gas, or in the case of water, you see it, but you say, well, it's amorphous. It has no real shape. Yes, it does have shape. What shape do you want me to give it? The question is not what is the shape of water. The question is, does it have shape? It's a yes or no type of question. If the astronaut releases a blob of water in the middle of space, there is no container. Okay, it's just floating there. That blob has shape. You may not understand the shape. You may not be able to describe it because it's in irregular shape. That blob has shape. What is the shape of the blob? That's a separate issue. But the blob has shape. Water has shape, so does air. And air around our planet has the shape of a shell, of a cloud. It's a spherical cloud that envelopes our planet.
Envelops?
Envelopes.
Envelops.
Envelopes.
If Bill thinks that we are the last generations of
Yeah.
human on Earth, why would he father me?
Because I did it before understanding that.
You figured that out later.
Yeah. I don't think I'd have him. Especially after today, I don't think I'd have him.
We're getting personal. Would you have fathered me if you had figured it out first?
I don't think so. I think I would have. Maybe I would have thought differently.
Dodged the bullet there. I'm glad you're done. Shit. Okay. Would a tornado count as a physical object?
No.
They can have a pretty clear shape.
No. Remember, tornado is not a standalone object. There is no standalone object called tornado. Tornado means moving air. Hurricane means moving air.
Okay,
Wind,
hold on.
moving air. Air is the object. Air is what is going to move. You first have to take the snapshot of the object, in this case, air. Then you can do whatever you want with it. You can do tornado with it. You can do, hurricane,
But then
wind.
what's the difference between tornado, fire, electricity, and table? Let's stick with tornado. What's the difference? If a table has a shape, but it's just an amalgamation of
I haven't moved it.
atoms.
Yeah, but no, it's not a table is not an amalgamation, an aggregation of atoms. A table is what I'm pointing to.
But what's the difference if you see a tornado?
Because the word tornado refers to something that's twirling. There is no tornado that's just standing still that's an ice cream cone.
So you have something against the motion of
Yeah,
tornadoes,
yeah.
and the motion of fire, and the
Yeah.
motion of electricity.
Right.
Motion's what bothers you.
See, if I have if I take a snapshot of a tornado, I have an ice cream cone.
But then is there something missing in the definition of object? Because then we're not just talking about shape, we're talking about motion. Because you're excluding objects, or you're making a distinction between objects that have their shape simply because of their motion, and objects that have their shape even if they're standing still.
Yeah, and that's why, let me show this one more time so that we put it in the right context. Okay, and let me put it on, it doesn't matter here. Something is the first word you have to define. You have to define what a thing is, what an object is, etc. Where does the word motion come in? Right at the end. Why? Because you need two objects, okay, two objects or one object at two or more locations. That's essentially what we're saying. Okay, so first, you can't define the word motion before you define the word object. Not in science, not in physics. First, you have to define what a thing is. Then you can start moving it and talk about motion, because the word motion means two or more locations of one object.
Is it confusing when you're talking about objects that have shape because of their motion?
No, it is confusing.
You're saying we exclude the motion objects because that kind of muddies the conversation?
First of all, then you get what one guy told me one day. This was a chemist. Okay, listen to this. Chemist told me that objects are made of motion.
Oh, well, yeah.
And that's
they
what
say that, yeah.
I mean, what is
Where
string
the
theory?
atoms are-
What is string theory? String theory says there's a 1D line. I can't imagine that, but let's go past that. And they say that a particle is the vibration of the 1D line in three directions, because I guess the particle is a ball. I don't know. So they're saying that the particle is a vibration of a line. That's what string theory has today. So the particles of quantum mechanics, according to string theorists, are made of motion. That's the problem.
I read a few days ago that dark matter is made of axions. Axions. Is that a new detergent commercial?
What was it, dark matter or dark energy?
Dark matter is made of axions.
Yeah, axions is, again, a concept. Dark matter is simply a variable that they had to create. They had to invent, the mathematicians had to invent to explain the rotation of a galaxy. Because they said, look, the stars on the outside are going just as fast or faster than the ones on the inside. How do you explain that? Well, you can't explain it with Newton, and you cannot explain it with Einstein. Neither of the two equations work. So they had to modify the equations. And to modify the equations meant they had to sprinkle kilograms on the outside of a galaxy to make it twirl like they all twirl, with the stars on the outside going just as fast as the ones on the inside track. That's the problem. So dark matter is simply a mathematical contraption, an invention that they made to fix a problem. And the problem was understanding why a galaxy twirls like it twirls. And right now they don't have an answer for that. And they're looking for dark matter through their telescopes or whatever, and they're never going to find it because they're looking for a ghost.
If frequencies are ropes winding and unwinding, I guess threads.
Yeah.
Does resonance happen?
Does
resonance? I don't know what the
I'd have to look at the context. Resonance, it just means that one area influences another one. Okay, so I don't know. I'd have to look at the context.
Gas is a concept of molecules. I guess
no.
The earlier thing saying that gas I guess they're equating gas with tornado.
Gas is a physical object.
What's the difference between gas and tornado?
Gas, I can take a gas like air. In fact, that's is the issue. I can take a chop. I can chop, or let's do it like I always say. You have an astronaut, okay, and he puts air into a balloon. Maybe he blows the balloon, right? He takes it to outer space, okay. And let's color code the air so that we can see it, just for the sake of seeing it. That's the only purpose of color coding it. He pops the balloon. What comes out of there is a gas. We call that specific gas, we call it air, okay? So in that sense, they're synonyms, okay? What came out of there is a blob. It's a blob that is expanding. You film it. You look at any frame of that film, and you'll see a blob. You'll see a shape, an irregular shape for sure. And it's not contained. There's no container because it's space. Space is nothing. So that blob is just expanding or floating away, and it's an irregular shape. So air does have shape. All those atoms put together are no different than the atoms put together to make a table. They're the same thing. So we don't say, oh, a table is not an object. Yeah, we say a table is an object. So why isn't air an object? Why isn't water an object if they are also made out of atoms? Is it because they're fluid? Is it because
so you would make a distinction between water and whirlpool?
Yeah. Okay. For example, this is very simple.
But it's not. It gets tricky because whirlpool has shape, but we're not talking about the whirlpool. We're talking about the water, which is a combination of atoms. The motion, when you add the motion, that's when you have a problem with the word.
Let me give you a rule of thumb. Just a rule of thumb, okay? Okay? Take a snapshot of whatever. Air, water. Can you take a snapshot of water? Is there a shape in your picture?
Yeah, that doesn't work because if you take a snapshot of whirlpool, the
No,
word whirlpool
no, but
doesn't
you can't-
count, but the
but
word
that's not a
word
whirlpool.
water.
But you can't call it a whirlpool because whirlpool means embodies the word motion.
Yeah, that's the
That's the problem. But you can take a snapshot of water when it's not moving, when it's completely still. If you can make it completely still, you can take a picture of that and say, I got a shape there. We'll call that water. So water is a physical object. Air is a physical object. All gases are physical objects.
But tornado, whirlpool, fire, and electricity are concepts.
Because they include
The concept
motion.
of motion.
It embodies motion. That's why fire is not an object. None of those are.
That's a good clarification to make
Yeah.
then. Where can people find the scientific dictionary that you use?
You'll find it. Where do I have that?
Is there a website?
Yeah, no, I have I've got a link.
Like a glossary?
Yeah, I've got a glossary, but again, I'd have to look it up. Yeah, there is one. I'll post it next time around. Okay, I'll post a link to it. Foundations of Physics. And they include the primary terms. You'll find them on my website. What is it? This one's called, what is it? Einstein's Idiots. If you go in there, you'll find on the first page, you'll find one of the first links will give you the keywords necessary to do physics.
Are 2D things objects?
Yeah. Two-dimensional, three-dimensional comes later. We have objects which exist, objects which don't exist. Objects which exist are not all 3D because a table is 3D, but the table I'm imagining is a table also because the word table always here and on the other side of the universe, in the land of the Klingons, the word table means object, always. It's always an object. Now, the one that I'm memorizing, the one I'm thinking about, that one doesn't exist.
Good.
The one that exists, the one I have that I'm pointing to, this one outside, that one exists. But the one I'm imagining, the one I drew, that one doesn't exist. What exists is the pencil, the paper, the
Graphite,
ink. Yeah, and the one that I'm imagining doesn't exist either. It has no location. In order for something to exist, it must have location. God wants to exist. He better have location. It's not enough for him to be an object. Say, look, I'm a magician. Here's my magic wand.
I guess imagination is what makes everything weird because
Also.
technically speaking, all objects that have shape should be the ones that we have in existence. But since we can imagine things, we can see the shape that isn't here. That kind of confuses everything.
Yeah, and the problem there, to follow up on that, the problem there is we also can imagine or think about or conceptualize concepts like intelligence, love, and
So you
so
can't
on.
imagine their shape.
No, you can't imagine their shape. But what I'm saying is that's where we get them mixed up because we say, well, if I can imagine love, there's no difference between the table that I'm also imagining. And it turns out that the word table refers to an object, whereas the word love does not. It refers to a concept. And so that's why you have to be very careful and you have to define these words very, the categories like object very precisely because otherwise you're going to be crossing the line back and forth and get lost. You're going to be chasing your tail around. No, you have to define them very clearly. What is an object? What is a concept?
If a shadow has shape, does it have something or lack of something called light?
Everybody asks the same thing. Hologram, shadows. Hologram is a 3D shadow. That's light. It's a dependent object. It's not a standalone object. In other words, if I remove the light, there is no hologram. If I remove the light, there is no shadow. The guy, me, for example, or a shadow of a tree, the tree is the object. The shadow is light shown through or across
So the
tree.
object is light.
Right, because the object are the ropes that mediate light, but the shadow is a dependent object. Without the tree, there is no shadow.
What do we mean by when we talk about standalone object? Because I've heard that many times today.
Standalone, by that I mean that it's not a dependent object. That should be the only object in the universe. In other words, the word square is a standalone object in that sense, that I don't need any other object to see the shape in front of me. I can just put a square there and say square. That's the only object in the universe. I haven't started creating other objects yet. I'm God, and I'm going to make a square, and that's where I start. Then I'll make a circle and make others. Right now, all I made is a square. That's the only object, and I don't need any other object for the word square to understand the word square. Square is that shape.
To imagine the word square.
Yeah,
you don't understand the word square.
But what I'm saying is you have to first name the object that you're going to use in your dissertation. And in this case, I'm going to use the word square for whatever. And I say square. That's the object. Okay, what are you going to do with that? Well, I'm going to make it fly around or whatever. Okay, I'll deal with that later. Right now, all I'm doing is presenting the object and giving it a name so that ET, not pointing to you.
Yes, I'm ET.
So that ET understands my language. Right now, I have to identify the object I'm going to use in my theory. That's the issue.
I think that's what gets hard to understand in all your talks here on the stream, because all of this becomes hard to digest when devoid of the presentation, because you talk a lot about the rules of a presentation, but you don't really understand why there are so many rules for a presentation, because there are no presentations. Like, there's no one here giving a presentation that you can criticize and be like, oh, you made a mistake here, you made a mistake there, for everyone to understand.
This is the issue. The issue is that what is science? What is physics? Physics, science is about explaining. You're going to explain, so you're giving a dissertation every time you explain something, even if you explain why the baby's bottle fell on the floor. Whatever you explain in life, you are giving a dissertation. So now you're talking to an ET. The ET comes. He doesn't understand your language, so you got to teach him your language first. You got to say, this is the bottle. Okay? This is the nipple, this is the baby, this is the high chair. So first you got to point, name, and name the objects. Now you can explain to him what happened if he understands the rest of the language, right? You can say, look, the baby hit the bottle and fell on the floor. Now you can explain what happened. First you need the objects. First you need to identify all the objects in your movie and the one you're going to explain. An explanation is a movie. Explanation of physics is a movie. First issue, identify the objects. You need to know what the objects are. You can't say, let me explain gravity to you, and you do not identify the object that's going to mediate gravity. What are you going to understand as far as the mechanism? That's the issue, the cause.
How would we describe or define a 2D thing?
We call it thing.
No, but do you point to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a naming. It's pointing and saying circle, triangle, square.
It's so that the other person can understand, can imagine the shape that you're imagining when you say.
You can even draw it or bring one to, a little picture or whatever. You point and you name. Triangle, I don't need any other object in the universe to understand what a triangle is. All I need is for you to point and name and say, that's triangle. That's circle.
So every
that's
time,
square.
so that what I understand, if you're explaining it to me, then at any time you say triangle, I can imagine the correct shape.
Right. And then you look at that. So the ET says, okay, every time he mentions the word triangle, he's referring to that thing that he just pointed to. That's all it is. So you present the objects that you're going to use to explain your theory of physics. And it better be an object. Hopefully not a 2D object, by the way, because, we don't need those. All I'm saying is the word triangle, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's one of those things that has shape. Therefore, it goes under the word object, because the only criteria, the only specification that you need to fall under the category called objects is shape. You don't need to be able to touch it. You should not be able to see it. You don't have to imagine it. None of that. All you have to do, does it have shape? Yes, it's an object. Done.
Have you read Einstein's Mistakes by Hans Ohanian?
No, I haven't read that one, but I know a lot of Einstein mistakes, that's for sure. I could write a book on that myself.
Are you saying there is no agreed upon dictionary, only the one on your website that you can't remember?
The problem is that for the last 10,000 years, the so-called scientists have not defined words scientifically, especially those who claim that they're physicists, they're really mathematical physicists. They have not defined any of the words of physics. They have not defined what an object is. They don't know what motion is. They don't know what distance is. And this is the challenge for you. Grab any textbook of physics, high school, college. See if any of them begin by telling you this is an object. This is what motion is. This is what distance is. No, what you'll find is already distance traveled and from there on. They talk about mass as if you know what mass is. They talk about force. One of the first things that you learn in physics, high school, is force equals mass times acceleration. And they start by saying this is how they weighed the Earth. How did we figure out how much weight the Earth has? And they show you the calculation. So they're immediately into math. They're into talking about force, mass, acceleration. They're talking about things, concepts. But at one point do they say, look, for the rest of this book, this is what an object is. This is what location is. This is what distance is. This is what motion is. You'll never find it. In fact, go to Newton, who started this whole thing, and in his scholium, he says very clearly, I don't define blah, 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 space and motion because we all know what it is. It's like, we don't need to define it because we all know what it is, right? Why are you going to take the trouble to define it? That's where he made the error. Yeah, in physics, we need to define those things.
You had to put the square that makes it not standalone. There aren't any squares you can point to standalone. Earth, I can point to Earth. Square, I can't point to square.
Square standalone means it doesn't depend on any other object. I can have a square all alone. That's all I need.
It's weird to
it's
think
the
of a
word.
square.
It's the word square. The word square is what stands alone. The word. The word halo requires the angel. It's not a standalone object. The word square stands alone. The word cube stands alone. I don't need any other object to say that's a cube. And I point to it, and that's a cube. It stands all alone. I point to a square, it stands alone. It doesn't mean it stands alone there. It means
this is the square floating in space.
A square floating in space. No, it's just the word square refers to that image in front of me. That's what standalone means. I don't need to have an angel next to the square to point to the square.
I think we're gonna have a test. We're just gonna go through a list of words.
Yeah, that's what happens.
Which one is an object? Which one isn't?
Yeah, and that's what they're doing now. They're trying to figure out. Well, is this an object? Is that an object?
I like it. Trying to bring it down.
It's trial and error, right? No, square, triangle, it doesn't matter. I don't need an angel next to a triangle for the word triangle to designate that shape. I do need the angel if I say that's a halo. Yeah. Because the word halo requires an angel, requires holiness. Yeah. I can't have, otherwise it's just a ring or a plate. That's the word. That word would be plate, or that word would be ring. If I want to call that halo, I need the angel. I need to put the angel right underneath it, or the wings for that matter as well,
Does it say somewhere how long we've been streaming?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if you want to make this the last question or keep going. Can you point to a square without drawing it?
It's irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. If I come across a wall, I say wall. If I come across a square, I see a square. That the word square is what's used to designate that shape. I don't need to come across a. We're
gonna be on the word square for a while, puffs. Square on paper versus square in a box in front of you. Same thing. We need to really figure this square thing out.
Look, if no astronaut has ever come across a square in space, because squares are objects that don't exist. Squares are objects that don't exist. Why? Because they're two-dimensional, and you need three-dimensionality first, and second, it has to have location. The three-dimensional cube I'm thinking of is an object, but it's an object that does not exist. It doesn't have location. The table I'm imagining is an object, but it's not. It's an object that doesn't exist because I'm imagining it. The real table, the one that exists, the one that has location. And you have to distinguish. It's the words you got to understand.
If you got a square, it's like a little bit tilted. Is it still?
No, if it's tilted, it's a rectangle. There's no such thing as a tilted square.
I think
and a tilted circle is an oval, always.
I guess that's it for the questions.
For the squares?
I think we beat the squares to death here. But yeah, there's a lot of
square questions.
No, there's a lot of I guess nuance when we're trying to talk about a shapes, but they're only shapes in motion, shapes, but there are words that are only that shape given another object like angel in relation to thing, or
In
shadow
that sense, standalone.
So it isn't as straightforward as shape is object in a lot of cases, because you kind of exclude things that have motion, exclude things that are that simply because of something else.
Mm-hmm.
So there are certain things that you do exclude as far as shape is concerned.
Let me give you a for instance based on that. I'm imagining a square or a cube. It doesn't really matter. I'm imagining this object, okay? So I imagine, I see, I visualize the shape, square or cube. I guess we all know what a square is, what a cube is, fine. I'm imagining it.
We need a picture of a square.
Does that square that I'm imagining, the only thing I'm imagining in the darkness of my mind, I only see a square, does that square move? And the answer is no. If I'm imagining only one square, that square does not move, okay? And yes, there it is, there's a square. I don't need to see it on paper because I know what the word square means. I've already had experience with it, so I say, well, I know what a square is. You know, 4 sides are all equal, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I imagine it. There's the square. I've created the square in my mind. Does that square have motion? Does it move? No, because there's nothing that I'm comparing it against. It's just a square in the darkness. That's all it is. That's God creating a square out of his mind and saying, hey, Bill, Spirit Bill, do you see that? Yeah, it's a square.
Because we don't count, right?
Yeah, because if I'm more than a spirit, then I'm an object. There's 2 objects. No, squares don't move. So you're not going to run across them first because they don't have location. What is motion? 2 locations. So no, you don't run across squares. That doesn't make it a non-object.
You're saying there are no squares that exist.
Right, there are squares that don't. There are no squares that exist, and no ideal geometric figures that exist at all. They're all imaginary. We can draw them. We can, do many
no
things.
Figures exist at all.
Huh?
No figures exist.
No. Figures exist, but irregular. In other words, they're not perfect cubes. You don't have a perfect cube in real life.
But that's not the point.
No, but then it's not a cube.
Even if you have an irregular shape, the shape doesn't exist. It's the object that looks like the shape. Like if I have a pyramid or something, even if it's an irregular pyramid, the pyramid itself doesn't exist. The shape pyramid, it's the rocks.
Yeah, again, we have to distinguish between ideal geometric figures and those that we build. If you look at the pyramids in Egypt, we call them pyramids. Are they perfect pyramids? Obviously not. They're very irregular. When you come close to them, you see that they're not perfectly smooth, etc. If you go into detail with atoms, forget it. It's not smooth at all. You go to the sun, it's almost a perfect sphere. I mean, if we could go in there and really look at it from every corner, right? We would say this is a perfect sphere. Well, it's not even perfect because there's one atom here, one atom there. They're out of alignment. It's not a perfectly smooth sphere. The bigger the sun or the star, maybe it approaches perfectly spherical object, but it never gets there because atoms make sure that one's off by a little bit, and it already makes it not perfect. The only way you can get a perfect geometric figure, for which we use these words such as sphere, cube, etc., is imagining it. That's the only way you can do it. You say, okay, I know what you're talking about, and we use those as adjectives. Oh, that's spherical, that's cubic, and so on. But does that mean it's a perfect cube, a perfect sphere? No, we just use that as an analogy, as an approximation.
But isn't it correct to say that a square in any case is a concept, because there is no square there? It's just it's a relation between the atoms of the ink that make the square.
Yeah, there's a fine line. We have to be aware of that. If you're comparing, you have a concept, okay? And when we say square, we're kind of distinguishing it from circle and triangle, for example. So we say, well, that shape we call square. That one there we call triangle, and that one we call circle. They're the set, it belongs to the set of geometric figures, right? 2-dimensional geometric figures. But that's not the point. The point here is that I can point to a square and call that square. I can call it X for all I want. I can call that X. I call it square because, I know the word. I could call it X. But whatever I call it, if I call it square, I don't need the triangle and I don't need the circle to compare the square against and say, well, this is a square. And what do you mean square? Well, because it's different than a circle. Because then I'm introducing another object, and that means I'm going to have a concept because I'm comparing them. Now, if I point to a square only, and that's the only object I'm imagining, that's the only one God imagined in the universe, and he allows me to see it somehow, and I look at it and I say, okay, that's a square. Or he tells me, from now on, this is going to be called a square, and I saw that it is good. Okay, that's the way it works. So I don't need to know circle or triangle to understand the word square refers to that object. Again, I can call it X. So it's a question of defining, of making sure that the words, that the objects have a word assigned to them. You have to name the objects. Just like Adam, God put him on Garden of Eden, and then he put all these animals and said, okay, name them. And the guy said, okay, elephant, turtle.
I guess, again, like I said earlier, this becomes more apparent when someone's actually giving a presentation. If we had an example of a presentation, you can kind of point out the step-by-step of the process of giving a presentation, why he has to define his words, what goes wrong if he doesn't define his words, or what could go wrong, how someone could misunderstand something if they don't have the exact definition, how the nuances can break it down in someone's understanding. All of this is kind of not as clear if we don't have a guy giving a presentation, because you're giving all these rules and basically rules and truisms, I guess. But they're all in a vacuum.
They're not in a vacuum in this sense. In the sense that science, physics is about giving a dissertation, explaining something. So that's the context.
But that doesn't become apparent until someone gives a presentation where it's like, oh, that's why you have to define it as such.
And that's when you don't want to confuse ordinary speech, because ordinary speech we say, hey, pass me the table. Well, what are you talking about? Is it this? No, that's a chair. I'm talking about that other object. So it doesn't matter there, because you don't have to be precise. Does love exist? Well, yeah, for me it does exist. Well, that's ordinary speech. In physics, you have to be very clear.
Because
what do you mean by exist? What do you mean by object? You have to be clear, because you're giving a dissertation to someone else who has a different understanding of the word. The ET, he comes over, he's got a different idea. He doesn't know your language at all. And so you got to say, look, this is a square. This is a cube. Let me tell you what I'm going to do with it. This is what I'm going to explain with it. So it's got to be in the context of an explanation, because that's what physics and that's what science is. It's explaining a mechanism. You cannot explain a mechanism without an object. That's the issue.
I guess that's it.
Okay, you can still write questions. We'll look them up.
And whatever we don't answer now, we can answer next time.
We'll look it up. If you put questions there, we missed you, don't worry. We're copying the questions, and we go through them, say, okay, we'll answer this well, and so on. Okay, then we'll see you next time. What is it, on Wednesday? And hopefully I'll see this gentleman sometime at the end of February. I bring him here with a gun.
I'm the boss fight.
Yeah, he's the boss. I got to behave here, because every time he comes around, I got to obey him. He's like God. We'll see you on Wednesday. Bye-bye.